Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, guys. It's another Thursday, another World Football stream. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. How many times can I say welcome? That's got to be a record for the first 5 seconds of a stream. But, anyways, today we are talking managers, not just any managers, of course, but guys who will be getting a little uncomfortable. Guys who will be looking over their shoulders a little bit, who may feel like the floor could drop out from below them, like that trap door could hit at any second. We're talking managers who are in the hot seat. There are varying degrees of heat for these seats. That's an accidental rhyme, but these guys have varying degrees of job security right now. You know how we do it here. We never discriminate. So we're going to do both club and international, as you may have already guessed. But yes, it is the international break after all. So we are going to do a little bit of both. But we're going to start on the club side of things. We're going to start with a man who has been the talk of the Premier League season as far as job security goes, because that's such an interesting thing to talk about, job security. But in sport, it is actually, the big one, Ruben Amorim. And we'll talk about Sir Jim Ratcliffe a little bit later because he had some interesting quotes yesterday. So we will get to him in just a moment. But when it comes to United managers, things are, bleak. The eternal argument is that United in general has gotten progressively worse with each manager that has come and gone. And it's not like these managers were nobodies, right? Like after Sir Alex Ferguson, you had David Moyes, he was very, very well respected in the Premier League. He was a manager that did very well with Everton. And compared to Ten Hag and Amorim, seeing David Moyes take United to seventh before he was sacked, not so bad. As you can see, Amorim has a 40% win rate in this moment. He is in 10th in the Premier League, which is better than 15th where they finished last season, right? Things are looking a little bit shaky for him. So unfortunately for Amorim, he has the worst points per game record of any manager since 1958, which is when Jimmy Murphy took over at Manchester United following the Munich air disaster, where they lost a bunch of players in that tragedy. So in the Premier League, I mean, how bleak is this, to use that word once again? The last six permanent Man United managers, and look at where Ruben Amorim is as far as points in the first 34 games. Horrible. The poor guy hasn't even got to 40 yet in comparison to someone like Jose Mourinho, who I remember when Mourinho was around, how badly some United supporters wanted him out. And now you look back on that with, rose-tinted glasses, maybe, but the guy was doing all right. But anyway, Ruben Amorim, way at the bottom there. His team finished in 15th last season, as I said. They haven't even won 2 Premier League matches in a row, 10 wins from 34 matches, so just a 29.4% winning percentage across all competitions. Now you have guys like Jim Ratcliffe saying, we'll give him 3 years. 3 years after all of these embarrassing moments. He had the Europa League final loss to Tottenham. He had the Grimsby Town loss in the League Cup. And the biggest criticism has been his inability to change, that he has this stubbornness. And this is why you'd think that people like Sir Jim Ratcliffe would maybe sort of inform him to try to do something different. However, Sir Jim has said 3 years because things don't happen overnight. He said he has not had the best of season, and Ruben needs to demonstrate he is a good coach over 3 years. So, first of all, if he is to get that kind of backing, it is a breath of fresh air in this modern age, right? To get that kind of time, you just don't really see that for managers these days. That rarely happens. And he pointed to Arteta's first years at Arsenal as being sort of something to compare to. Not so hot at the start. Now they're one of the best teams in Europe. But on the other side of it, well, one, a vote of confidence from ownership is usually the sign of that a manager is going to get sacked soon. It's usually the death knell. But two, it's a huge, huge promise for Jim Ratcliffe and United to keep, to promise 3 years. It's going to be, it's going to be subjective to how well they do. If they continue to slide and if they're below 10th and Europe isn't even looking close for them, how long can you really go forward with this guy? So he needs to see that consistent improvement, which we've seen little bits of this season. It's not been super, super explosive like perhaps United fans would want, but there has been little improvements this season. If he doesn't see any more of that, then I don't think he's going to be able to keep that 3-season promise, which Amorim has said previously that Ratcliffe told him this season counts as his first season, even though he started last season and had about 27 matches, which is quite a few matches. That's the majority of the season. When you look at the Premier League, has what, 38 in a single season? So that is quite a lot. Now, Sports Watcher asking in the app, would you can him? Me personally, look, I have a complicated relationship with Ruben Amorim. He used to play for my club, Benfica. My parents are Portuguese, so I follow him very closely. My fellow countrymen, I want to see him doing very well. I saw his Sporting dominate Portugal. They were a devastating team with Victor Gyökeres, all these guys playing in that team. They were fantastic. We saw how well he was doing at the tail end of his Sporting career before he signed with Manchester United. They're pretty much unbeaten, winning match after match, beating Manchester City with Sporting, just fantastic. I would like to see him be a little bit more flexible with his formation. I don't know if that's going to happen. If December comes around and United is still in this sort of like 13th place, they're not playing Europe. They're just playing domestic football. If they're still around like 13th or so, I know they're in 10th right now, but in the bottom half of the table, I don't know how you can continue on. It's really difficult. I wouldn't want to see him go, but I feel like that's the move that would happen. And I feel like if I was the Sir Jim Ratcliffe in this situation, then my hand would sort of be forced into doing so. But again, it's going to be about if you see that sort of progression on the pitch. But enough about Ruben Amorim, man who's been spoken of to death. Now let's move on to our next guy whose seat is pretty hot. And another guy who won't relent on his beliefs, that is, of course, Ange Postecoglou of Nottingham Forest FC, NFFC. Now, Ange Postecoglou was essentially sacked for not relenting on his ideas at Tottenham. However, to be fair to him, he relented on his attacking style of play in the Europa League final last season to beat who? Manchester United and Ruben Amorim. So, as you can see, he made his return to Nottingham Forest. Look at that record. That is not good. He's a man who's known for sort of his no-holds-barred attacking style of play. He took over from an incredibly defensive coach, though, in Nuno Espirito Santo. So, in fact, this squad is built to play in that defensive manner. So the clash of styles has led to this, what you're seeing on the screen right now. The worst start for a manager in Nottingham Forest history over 100 years, going over 100 years ago, back to 1925. That's 7 matches in a row now without a single win. Since taking over against Arsenal, Forest have conceded 15 goals in 7 matches. They were eliminated from the League Cup by a championship side in Swansea. They're losing to Midtjylland in the Europa League. I mean, it's gotten so bad that Nottingham's own Forest, the own Forest is chanting. No, the own fans are chanting "sacked in the morning." That classic chant that's usually reserved for opposition managers who are in hot water, right? So that's absolutely ruthless from their own fans to be doing that, to show how lowly they think of this manager. And the issues with Forest have been largely their defensive organization, right? Constantly conceding goals from free kicks and set pieces in general. And defensive issues are nothing new when it comes to Ange Postecoglou. He'll say it was down to injuries, of course, but even when Spurs didn't have injuries, they played with that high line that was just killing them at times, absolutely killing them. So this is absolutely not a strong suit of Ange Postecoglou's game, and it is the thing that they need to be strongest at in this moment. So it's not looking like he'll make it that far. Now, the owner of Forest, everyone knows that he's a very interesting man, Evangelos Marinakis. It's not one to dwell on anything, on a decision. I would not be surprised if in this international break, he ended up lining up a replacement for Ange Postecoglou and sacking him. Now, Nuno Espirito Santo was largely sacked due to just not seeing eye to eye with Marinakis, not entirely down to the performances on the pitch. I mean, they had 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 loss when he was sacked. Because it's not like the squad has been built at Forest into a bad squad, right? It's a team that should be performing far better than they currently are. And for Postecoglou to come in and for the team to get worse under him, that's a pretty damning sign. Don't tempt Marinakis. He will do something if his team is struggling. He's known for being a little bit crazy, and sacking Postecoglou soon wouldn't be outside of the realm of possibility whatsoever when it comes to Marinakis. He has that in him. So if it doesn't happen in this international break, if the results don't improve, and by that I mean if Forest don't win their next game, I think it's over for Postecoglou. Honestly, it's really, really difficult. Really difficult. Um, we have JG in the chat, I believe, speaking about Ruben Amorim, saying the biggest knock against him is his stubbornness to change. How are you going to promise 3 years to someone that won't change regardless of results? That's the big thing. Now, say what you will about Amorim and his unwillingness to change. He basically just he is so married to this back three. That is an issue, right? Of course, that's an issue. But Ratcliffe signed this guy knowing that he's married to this back three, this sort of 3-4-2-1 formation. So the big thing is, how can you promise, like you said, the 3 years? And I just don't think that that's going to happen if things go poorly. It's a very romantic way of looking at things. Like, yes, we'll hire a manager like they did with Sir Alex Ferguson back in the 80s, where it didn't start great. It took him, what, like 3-4 years to win anything with United, something like that. And it really didn't start to pick up until like the 90s for them. That's a very romantic way of looking at things where teams could afford to do that. But there's so much money in football now that United can't afford to be missing Europe year after year after year. So it's just an unrealistic promise at any club to give anyone a guarantee of 3 years, basically. So thank you, JG, for that chat. Now let's move on to the next guy, Igor Tudor, with a low heat on this one. Igor Tudor is a light simmer because things started well in Serie A. He got wins against Parma, Genoa, okay, lower table teams, but they also got that Derby d'Italia win over Inter Milan. Now, following that, Juve's defense has struggled quite a bit, which coincided with their offense becoming a little bit blunt. Now you have Juve failing to win 5 matches in a row. Glass half full view of this, failed to lose 5 in a row with 5 draws, so not losses. So that's good. Now, last season, the man who Igor Tudor replaced, Thiago Motta, he started to get called Thiago Drata because they were just drawing match after match after match after match. And that's not a good look. And some Juve fans are probably having PTSD seeing their team draw 5 matches in a row under Igor Tudor. Now, Igor Tudor is sort of lowest on the chain of club managers for a reason, or I guess highest, since they're the least amount of danger. But anyway, we have him here because there's still a belief that he can turn things around and get Juve on track, heading in the right direction. But his biggest issue, forget the defense and leaking goals, that's not as bad as the attack right now. If Jonathan David is your guy in the attack, then he absolutely needs to get his confidence up and firing again. David, my fellow Canadian, he's been quite awful since going to Juventus. Dreadful in front of goal. Some of his misses are like borderline comedic at this point, which is unfortunate for him because there is a player there. And unfortunately for Tudor and Juve, those misses have oftentimes been a difference between a win or defaulting to yet another draw. A lot of the criticism surrounding him is something that we've seen someone like Arne Slot get, which maybe we'll speak about him later, New signings not gelling very well. And if we want to compare the two once again, Liverpool's matches were on a knife's edge for a while, and they were constantly winning late to get wins, right? But now they've shifted in the other direction. And so bringing that back to Igor, if these draws start sliding into losses, starting with a tricky match against Como away, a Como side that is managed by Fabregas, that has a great, great, great talent in Nico Paz, then they play Real Madrid. Then they play Lazio. So Igor Tudor, if he fails to get results there, he could be in trouble. So that's why Tudor's seat is heating up. It's not at a boil. It's bubbling and steaming at the moment. But I do think he'll get some added grace that perhaps other managers wouldn't, simply because he's a former Juve player. And I think Juve supporters will be a little bit more charitable towards him than they would with someone else. That's just how the game goes, right? Now, from the app, we have Hi Shane saying, Juve needs to win Serie A again. Been a few years since their big run. It has been quite a few years. Honestly, this is why I like to watch Serie A right now. I don't know if you're a Juve supporter, Shane, but this is why I like watching Serie A, because no one's really been able to go back to back since Juve have, right? You had AC Milan, you had Inter, you had Napoli, you had Inter again, I believe, right? And then Napoli again. I could be mixing those up a little bit, but no one's going back to back. It's always, a wider field of teams that can actually win Serie A, and that I very much enjoy. Now, I think we're going to move on to international football at this point. I think we will move on to someone named Julian Nagelsmann, the coach of Germany. Now, him signing on as Germany coach was a bit of a surprise to begin with Hansi Flick failing with Germany, which was a huge surprise, right? Especially when you see what Hansi Flick's doing at FC Barcelona. But Germany really, really hoped that they could get Jurgen Klopp to take over the German national team in 2023. He was, of course, busy with a little team called Liverpool. And he would play one more season with them and then move away from management altogether, which we do miss Jurgen Klopp. We do want to have him back. But anyway, the German Football Association, they went in with Julian Nagelsmann. He'd just come off being sacked by Bayern Munich, a massive club, of course, replaced by Thomas Tuchel, which results-wise didn't end up being that big of an upgrade. But him getting fired by Bayern was seen as pretty harsh, but there were questions over how he could manage a national team. He's a big ideas guy in management, right? You know, he was known for being this young phenom. He's 32 years old and he's managing a pro team. Wow, it's crazy, which it was, based on these great ideas of how he wanted his team to play at Hoffenheim and then Leipzig and then to Bayern Munich. And having complex ideas with a national team doesn't typically work out in your favor, right? We saw that happen with Luciano Spalletti, a guy who has a distinct system and it just comes across as sort of lukewarm or just dysfunctional, completely dysfunctional when you only have a few days per month with your players. But Nagelsmann did all right for Germany ahead of Euro 2024. They were so close to defeating Spain in the semifinals, I believe it was. In fact, if not for or was that the quarterfinals? That may have been the quarterfinals, actually, and then France, Spain in the semis. But anyway, if not for that wrong handball call, which should have been a penalty for Germany, maybe they would have advanced. I mean, they even admitted, the referees admitted that it should have been a penalty after the tournament. But anyway, Germany did well in that tournament. They did fairly well. They played exciting football. It was seen as a bit of a robbery, the fact that they didn't get to move on. They hosted, that helps. They had Toni Kroos in the midfield, that absolutely helps. But now since 2025 rolled around, Germany has 2 wins from 6 matches. They even lost to Portugal, with whom Germany typically slaps no matter what kind of form either team is in. And I would know that as someone who supports Portugal. I would watch those matches with clenched fists all the time. So they lost to Portugal, which never happens. They lost to France. Then they lost to Slovakia, that is, not Slovakia, in their first qualifying match for this upcoming World Cup. Now, they did beat Northern Ireland, as you would expect, but fans and pundits in Germany aren't incredibly impressed with Julian Nagelsmann at this moment. Someone like Lothar Matthäus is telling him to stop experimenting with this team. Find a formation like a back 3, which he suggested, because the experimentation is killing this team, he says. Yes, there are limitations to the squad, but there are certainly talented players that should be performing at a higher standard. There's apparently a rift between Julian Nagelsmann and Manuel Neuer that goes back to the Bayern Munich days, right? Which is something you definitely do not want to happen. One of the most important players for Germany, one of the best goalkeepers of all time, in my opinion, maybe the best of all time, certainly the most revolutionary. So there's still apparently a rift there. It's gotten to a point where Nagelsmann is saying things in the media like, we are in no position to underestimate an opponent. And who is their opponent next? Luxembourg, a team that most teams just roll over. This is Germany that we're talking about here. This man is dying for an emphatic win in their next match, as they are level on points with Northern Ireland in qualifying in a group that everyone thought that Germany would absolutely destroy, you know, that they could just walk through and do absolutely fine. So Mr. Nagelsmann, watch that seat, man. If he has a bad window here this October, things could get very, very toasty for him. Now, my man JG in the app saying Italian football also seems kind of trigger happy in sacking managers after poor results more than other leagues. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong there. I believe that there was 13 managerial change. Don't quote me on that number. I could be wrong, but I think there was 13 managerial changes in Serie A from last season to this one, which is insane. I think something like 7 of the top 10 changed their managers. You're not wrong there, Jay. They are absolutely a little bit trigger happy. Or maybe they'll call it ambition, seeking the absolute best or something like that. And Jay also says Nagelsmann seems to be more so than Ruben, because if Germany fails to make the World Cup, that's like the end of the world for them. Absolutely. Germany not making this World Cup, especially in the group that they have, that they should absolutely be just rolling everybody else over, is a massive, massive failure. And I appreciate you saying that, Jay, because that actually segues beautifully into our next man, both Italian and both could be missing the World Cup. We'll see. It's Gennaro Gattuso. Oh man, Italy. These guys haven't seen a World Cup since 2014. Just let that sink in for a second. A nation like Italy, who people associate this sport with, hasn't been at a World Cup since 2014. 2018 didn't get in, Sweden snatching their ticket from them. 2022, this time North Macedonia with that Sicilian miracle, leaving Italy out once again. Unbelievable stuff. 2026. Now, you can see Gennaro Gattuso has a record of 2 wins from 2, but Italy themselves do not have that record. They have a record of 4 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. Now, they sort of got off to a poor start against Norway, which did cause Luciano Spalletti to lose his job. As I briefly mentioned before, he's an example of a guy who just, it doesn't really work out at international football. His ideas are too complex. His teams take longer to adapt to his ideas. And at the club level, he's training his teams week in, week out. He gets an entire season, so they have time to actually pick up on the ideas. They get tons of time. International level, you get 7 to 9 days with your players before they have to go back to their teams, and you don't see them for another month. So there just isn't enough time for these complex ideas. So he was bounced, and Gennaro Gattuso was brought in. Bit of a journeyman managerial career for him. He's had 10 jobs in about 12 years, so he's not really one for lingering at a club. And he's won 1 trophy with Napoli, the Coppa Italia. But he is a fiery manager, and sometimes that's all you need is a dude that can get your team fired up and ready to run through brick walls. That gimmick does die quickly at the club level, hence why you see these managers move on so quickly. As a player, you hear these speeches over and over from the coach, and you're like, okay, dude, sure. Like, I'm over this. I've heard this all before. It just doesn't hit like it does the first few times. But at the international level, there's so little time to work together that maybe these blasts of angst and pure adrenaline from a coach can work. Gattuso saw Italy beat Estonia 5-0. Great start. Then they just barely beat Israel 5-4, which is not great. They're still in second to Norway in qualifying. They're 6 points behind Erling Haaland's Norway and the fellas. They are level on points with Israel currently, meaning if they finish in second with how qualifying works this goes around, they would find themselves in a qualification playoff, which, Italians know how these things go, right? We just talked about them. Sweden, North Macedonia, those Vietnam flashbacks kicking in of losing those playoffs. So if they finish below second, sorry, you're out. You got to hope for 2030. Finish in second, you're going to a playoff. Catching Norway will be difficult. They are 6 points ahead of them. So Italy, you got to stop this. You got to stop. You can't win the World Cup in 2006 and then win the Euros in 2021 and miss 2, maybe 3 World Cups in a row if they don't sort things out. So Gattuso has that immediate pressure coming into this job, not just on the sporting side when it comes to actually qualifying in a semi-tricky group, but also to try and undo this habit that Italy have of missing World Cups. The last 2 in a row, that's crazy. That's not easy. Not in football-obsessed countries like Italy to sort of undo this habit, right? So those are the fellas that have varying degrees of warm seats. Ruben Amorim, of course, he is a man who has a pretty hot seat, despite his owner saying that he'll give him the full 3 years. We certainly do not see that happen very often in modern football, especially at a club like Manchester United, which they are fixing their finances a little bit. But if they continue to miss out on Europe, how long can they let that happen, right? So Ruben Amorim, despite what his owner says, or his owner, co-owner of the club says, very hot seat. Second, Ange Postecoglou. You could make a case that he has the hottest seat of all, as this man hasn't won a single match at Nottingham Forest since taking over for Nuno Espirito Santo. Look, my prediction is that he could be gone as early as this international break if Marinakis, the owner of Forest, ends up finding a replacement for him that they could bring along. But they have tricky matches coming up, matches that they should be winning. We'll see how they do. If they don't win, I think that's it for Postecoglou. Igor Tudor, 5 matches in a row where he has failed to find a win, but 5 matches where they haven't lost either. So they're in draw territory, but they have difficult matches coming up against Como, Real Madrid, and then Lazio. So if they go, maybe let's say they lose or draw those matches and go 8 matches unbeaten, then Igor Tudor's seat is going to be very, very hot. Julian Nagelsmann, Germany, not in a great position at this time, and Germany failing to make it to the World Cup would be one of the absolute biggest failures. They'd have to do Das Reboot once again, like they did in the early 2000s. So Julian Nagelsmann, the team is not playing very well. Losing to Slovakia, we'll see. They need that big win up against Luxembourg coming up. Then you have finally Gennaro Gattuso, who we just spoke about, Italy. They got to make a World Cup, man. They haven't been there since 2014, 2018, they missed it. 2022, they missed it. Gattuso comes in to try to be a fireman, try to get Italy back on track. If they finish in second, they're going to a playoff. We know how that goes with Italy. There'd be a lot to overcome. If they finish below second, you're looking at 2030, going to Morocco, Spain, and Portugal, hopefully in the qualifying cycle there. All right, guys, we do actually have a couple, and we have M. Falconer from the app saying, put Arteta on this list. Yeah, you know what? That's someone that you could put in there in sort of the he must win silverware this season kind of argument. Right now, results are going fine for Arsenal. Things are okay for them in that regard. Maybe they would like to be, leading the league in this moment, but they're certainly not out of the Premier League title race. That is for sure. But he's someone who absolutely has to win this season. He has to win silverware this season. And if he doesn't, it's hard to see how he would stick around. So you're absolutely right, M. Faulkner. He is someone who you could put on here, but maybe we'll start looking at that in April if we do this list again. People who could be in the hot seat, sort of coming towards the end of their cycles at a club potentially. Now, speaking of coming to an end of a cycle, we have just a couple of honorable or sort of dishonorable mentions that we'll just quickly get into here. One of them, one person to keep an eye on, we're going to stick in the Premier League, Vitor Pereira at Wolves. Now, he is not safe. Do we, don't think we don't see you over there, Vitor Pereira, with 0 wins in the Premier League at this moment. He came in and had Wolves playing fairly well last season. However, he also had Mateus Cunha, now with Manchester United, in that team last season, who was just scoring for fun. He couldn't stop scoring. He was overperforming his XG like crazy. And without him, Wolves have been struggling to get results. They at least stopped the bleed a little bit. They're drawing matches, but if they fail to beat Sunderland and Burnley, teams that they need to beat, as they will be teams that will be fighting to stay alive in the Premier League with them, Vitor Pereira, that could be the end for you. And finally, one that's going to surprise people just a little bit. Let me explain. Arne Slot. Now, he isn't in big trouble. He is not. No one is going to try and say that. However, he too has some eyes on him in this moment. And you're starting to see all these Liverpool supporters who were absolutely in love and engaged with him, still being in love with him perhaps, but questioning some of his choices these days. Again, if we're going to use this water scale, boiling water scale, he doesn't even have the bubbles forming in the pot, no steam rising. But if you touch that water, it's a little bit hotter than perhaps you'd feel comfortable doing so, a little like, ouch, damn, man, I don't want to be washing dishes with this water kind of thing. So the reason being, 3 losses in a row. Liverpool haven't done that since 2023. 3 losses after all that investment. That is part of the problem for him, and will be part of the solution if he can get all of those players to settle, right? But there's old players that are making mistakes as well. You have Konate, who's been a little bit of a liability at the back. You have Salah walking around the pitch, getting torched. Things like this that Slot needs to sort out soon before it gets away from him. He'll absolutely be given time to do so, and rightfully so. The guy won the Premier League in his first season, right? But like Vitor Pereira, well, quite a bit less than Pereira, to be honest, but we'll be keeping an eye on Arne Slot. They play United next, actually. So that's going to be an interesting battle. You have Amorim. If he gets a win at Anfield, scary stuff for Arne Slot. If they beat United, to be expected, right? All right, JG with the final chat from the app says, Italy lost their fire when the old guard retired. They seem complacent to change and don't have any real strikers. Yeah, the old guard. You're talking about like the Chiellinis, et cetera, Buffon, all those guys. For sure, for sure. I do like Matteo Retegui, who did incredibly well at Atalanta last season, but people forget about him because he ran off to Saudi Arabia, but he's still scoring goals for Italy. I think that he's a good striker, but I know what you mean. They don't have like that iconic, like an Inzaghi or something like that, iconic striker, and it feels like they've been like that for a while. The defense is looking promising. It's too bad that Leone got injured. Um, but look, I think that they're going to ultimately, I think they'll make it, but I'm not willing to bet any money on Italy just because they do have a habit of letting themselves down in World Cup qualifying. But hey, that's it, guys. Those is our, what am I saying? Those are our embattled managers, guys who could get their marching orders fairly soon, depending on things playing out in the near future. As always, I want to thank you for joining me here today. Thank you so much to everyone who dropped some ideas, some questions in the chat. Always appreciate that. I have a blast with you guys. I'm Adrian. Try to stay sane during this international break.